I am curious though, in terms of price. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, talking about price, there's not much to say. A market's going to, a price is going to go up and down. But in terms of the XOR token, the XOR token, I'm curious to talk about this a little bit because of the token bonding curve. And I've heard you talk about how, so in theory, the XOR price should be somewhat stable. It should kind of trade within the range, I guess, a smaller range than some tokens because it's tied to the token bonding curve. And yet, since the launch of PokeSwap and the whole market did crash, and we saw XOR kind of crash with the market. And I heard you talk about that being because the token bonding curve has not yet fully been collateralized. And so I'm just wondering, was your hope when you launched, was your hope that it would be fully collateralized by now? How does it become fully collateralized? And what is the strategy, I guess, to get there?
Yeah, so you don't actually need full collateralization for it to be effective. We have so today there's around 350,000, it's actually 345,000 XOR in circulation. Out of this, around 55,000 or so are locked into validators. So these are not having any economic effect, right? Because they're locked up, they're not doing anything. And then there's another like 120,000 or so of XOR that are locked into liquidity pools. So these have some economic effect because if you trade into them, it's giving liquidity in the markets, but they're not dumpable tokens because they're kind of locked up, right? So that's like 170,000, 180,000 XOR are kind of non-floating. From that standpoint, right? So what that means is really, you have like another, like maybe 170,000, 160,000, 170,000 XOR that are floating. So you need to collateralize this. At least, not everyone's going to dump when this market goes down, so you don't really need full collateralization, but you do need collateralization of maybe 80,000 XOR, which we didn't have when the market went down in May. I was kind of hoping that things would continue to go up for a few more weeks or so that we could continue to build up reserves, because we were actually doing quite well in building up reserves when the market started to turn down in May. So I was watching particularly ETH and DAI reserves in the token bonding curve. And I think at the peak, before the crash in May, we had, I think, around 300 or 400 ETH and around maybe 5 million DAI or something like that. Maybe it's like 4 million DAI. So these reserves were eaten immediately within a day or two when the market was going down and people were selling. When you sell into the reserves, the tokens are burned, so it reduces the supply. That's why we burned. From the peak, we burned around 15,000 XOR, which is quite a substantial amount of XOR. But it costs us all the reserves in the token bonding curve, right? So what that means really is that 4 million DAI and 300 or so ETH were not enough. Maybe I think if we had maybe 3 to 4 times that amount, we could have reached a more stable price of XOR that was within the target volatility band. The volatility band is the price that the token bonding curve sells new XOR for, and the price that it buys back for. There's actually a 29% margin, because it's 20% margin normally, and when it's under collateralized, there's an extra 9% that's tacked on. So it's 29% margin between the high and the low. And so XOR was never meant to be a stable coin, but it was meant to be predictable. And if you can get it to float within this volatility band, then you get some predictability, and that can bootstrap the economic system much more easily. It's easier to talk to people and get them to accept XOR if you have some expectations about what it's going to be worth in a month, right?
Right.
I
So
don't know if
how do you, is that still the goal, is to get it to that range, that 29% range? And I guess because the prices dropped so much from the launch, is this the new range for XOR, or is there a way that you see it getting, is the ideal range for it where it launched, which I think was around the $600 mark, or does it not matter?
Well, the token bonding curve starts at like 900, it's like 895 right now, and it will buy. So that's what it sells XOR for, but it'll buy XOR about 30% less. So yeah, um, yeah. Right now it's trading, I think, 150 or so. So it's significantly below the target volatility range. But it'll eventually reach the volatility range because every transaction burns XOR, so the supply is reducing every day.
Right.
It's really continuously going down. So just from use, and because there's it's the native token of the network, so there's some intrinsic value or intrinsic utility of the token. It's being used for staking on the validators. It's also being used in referendums. If you vote on chain, you vote by bonding XOR. To become a council member, you bond XOR. So all there's many uses for XOR. Transaction fees, to reduce spam on the network. These are also paid in XOR. So, and also liquidity on PokerSwap. So all liquidity pairs are with respect to XOR. So there's quite a lot of utility that XOR has just intrinsically based on the system design. And additionally, every transaction burns a small amount of XOR. It's a small amount, but it's non-zero. So eventually, you will hit a point where you burn so much of the supply that you'll be going back up to the where the supply is managed by the token bonding curve contract, right, rather than kind of by the secondary markets or the market trends.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So when will this happen? I mean, that's anyone's guess. I think it's not too critical of a situation right now, but it is important for long-term expectations. So I don't know if you've seen the news. There's people in El Salvador, for whatever reason, protesting the new Bitcoin law. And one of the comments that the protesters were making, was that if you get paid like $30 today in Bitcoin, it could be $5 tomorrow. Which is true, right? I think they also could have mentioned that you could pay $30 for transaction fees, but that's another comment. So to really be useful in situations like that, if you want a country to use XOR, you have to have some what's called forward guidance or forward predictability of the token, and that's really what the token bonding curve is supposed to give us. And you don't need full collateralization, like I said. You just need maybe a third of the token supply, maybe 15 to 30% of the token supply should be collateralized for it to be effective in most market conditions, I would say.